Anytime a company can look at driving real measurable ROI and real measurable impact through their sustainability initiatives, it makes the case to do it pretty bulletproof. I have a friend who's the CSO of another big company, and she coined a phrase that I loved at an event I was at recently, which is, people think of us as tree huggers, but we're money tree huggers. As an LSP, as a logistics services provider, we think about sustainability a lot in terms of efficiency, trying to drive down inefficiencies because those cost money, but also create carbon and or waste. And we also look at opportunities to change the fuel that is driving and powering the vehicles that move our clients' freight. And then we also look at the other, social and governance elements, around workplace health and safety, and making sure that we have the right policies and procedures in place to keep modern slavery out of our value chain, or make sure human rights are being respected. So we think about it holistically, but our main focus is on efficiencies and fuel shift to drive decarbonization and to drive a reduction in waste. Transportation is the third largest sector contribution to greenhouse gas emissions globally. It accounts for about 15% of greenhouse gas emissions. If you zoom in on freight and logistics, it's about 7 to 11% of global emissions, depending on if you include warehousing or what your boundaries exactly are. And what this means is it's a big enough lever to matter, and it's operational enough to be able to drive real improvement and ROI. For a lot of shippers, focusing on transportation and logistics emissions is one of their elements of value chain emissions, or scope 3 emissions, as it's often called, that they can make a difference on, and relatively quickly. And so therefore, it's a really good place to invest some time and thought and resource into. The companies that are most successful on sustainability have done the initial work to find the efficiencies and to save a bunch of money, and then they've leveraged and used that to help invest in some of the other things that cost money initially, but yield long-term results. Getting good, high-quality, clean data sounds a little boring, but it's incredibly important, and it's important for a few different reasons. In the current climate that we're in, and really in any climate, it's important to make sure that you're doing sustainability in a way that does drive value. The critique that we're just doing it to be tree huggers, or to make everybody feel good, can unravel best intentions. But if you are doing it in a way that drives real value, and if you're measuring that value and that impact, then you have a perfect response to that, and you don't get caught up in that type of a critique. If you have low quality data, if you have generalizations, and you're just using assumption-based or spend-based to factor what your emissions are, you're gonna have a really hard time finding opportunities to drive efficiency, and that's where a lot of the cost savings are. And you're gonna have a hard time showing progress over time. Because if you're just using spend-based or averages, then how do you improve, right? You make some investments in improvements, or either around efficiency or around fuel. Well, if you're not measuring it at that level of detail, you're not gonna be able to track that progress towards your goals. And sustainability, if you think about it strategically and work on it strategically, can be a great driver of ROI, which helps it escalate up the ladder in terms of priorities. So I think if you're looking at ways to improve efficiency, reduce waste, those are all things that save money. We should all be doing everything we can, investing the time we need, the resources we need to achieve that, because the ROI is almost instant and large. You can't just be driven by what's going to lower our carbon the most. You have to be driven by the whole, holistically. You have to be driven by the cost, the quality, the time, the sustainability, and the resilience. The challenges around some of the operational efficiencies there might be structural challenges. It might be more efficient to consolidate 3 trucks onto one, but if you need a data server rack in your data center on Monday and another one on Wednesday and 5 more on Friday, you're not going to wait till Friday to move all of them, right? So there's some operational constraints that can be challenges. And then the challenge for fuel shift, or changing what fuel is driving the freight, is systemic. So it's about availability and access and production. For battery electric trucks, it's about charging infrastructure and whether trucks have enough range now to make it operationally work. So there's some structural challenges, and many of those are overcomable, but to overcome them, it requires investment, right? So there's a capital or operating cost to making that shift. This is not something that companies can do on their own, because the impact is across the value chain, and because everybody has their own piece of the puzzle. We've found that it's really powerful to come together with our clients and think collaboratively about how we can drive efficiency, how we can lower cost, how we can lower waste. And what this gets you is 2 things at the same time. It reduces the environmental impact of your freight and logistics, and it reduces the costs of your freight and logistics. So we find it to be a collaborative partnership to try to drive win-win that really helps everybody.